Hello, I'm John, and this is Must Read More. Welcome back to the third part of my bookshelf tour. So, last time we left off on Studs Terkel's American Dreams, and so our first book is Harold McGee's On Food and Cooking, which I'll admit I haven't read every single last page of this, but I did read most of it. I've had this for more than 15 years at this point. When I bought it, it was brand new. It had a dust jacket, and I've got a lot of use out of this. It's not a cookbook. It's about the science of cooking and about the sort of the biology of plants and that kind of thing. The garlic and onions and all that fun stuff. And it's really just a good book. There's let's see. Here's a chart of coffee flavor from the bean to the cup. It's just filled with things like that. It's kind of an encyclopedia, but it's really more like a textbook. There's the structure of chlorophyll. Just kind of interesting. And we have Salt, Sugar, Fat by Michael Moss. This is an account of kind of what the big food corporations are up to and how they use salt, sugar, and fat to sculpt these highly processed foods. I'm not really super into this subject or anything like that. I was really kind of, I do read these books like this sometimes just to see what's going on in the world, I guess. This is really good, actually. It talks about how some of your favorite foods or foods that you hate or whatever are created in these food laboratories, and how they use, if they have to use less fat, they'll use more sugar, and if they can't use sugar, they'll use salt, and it's really interesting. I probably didn't make it sound very interesting, and to be fair, I don't really know why I've kept this, because I probably won't read this again. See, here's the Emperors of Chocolate by Joël Glenn Brenner, and there's M&Ms on the back. This is about let's see, it's been a while since I've read this, but this is about Hershey and Mars, the Mars family, and their multi-billion-dollar candy businesses, and sort of what they are like or what they were like, and the forces that shape their lives. It's a very interesting, believe it or not, this is a very interesting book, and this is a really good book. The Mars family in particular is pretty interesting. How I don't know if they're still around, but at the time of this was, I think, in the 90s or the early 2000s. They were among the wealthiest families in the country, and they lived like regular people in regular houses, and they drove standard cars, and not standard shift, but just very cheap cars, and they didn't take vacations. Just a very interesting look into that, and into the development of candy and that kind of thing. This is arguably essays by Mr. Christopher Hitchens there, and I read this last year. Admittedly, I don't remember these very well for some reason. There are some books that I read, they go in and they go straight out. And that's not because of Hitchens, that's just because of the way I'm set up. I think essays in particular are pretty well, if they don't completely capture me, I just kind of forget about them. It's kind of unfortunate. But this is actually a really good book. This isn't really so much about religion or anything like that. I mean, he's he was well known for being, anti-religion or whatever. But that's not really what these are about in specific. So the next one is a biography of David Foster Wallace, of all people. It's Every Love Story is a Ghost Story. A Life of David Foster Wallace by D.T. Max. And this is actually pretty good. If you don't like his fiction, he's still a very interesting character, or a very interesting figure, rather. This goes from his childhood all the way up until he ended his life, and kind of details how he grew up. When he was young, he played tennis, and then he went to college. I believe, was it in Arizona or New Mexico? I really don't remember. This is just a really interesting story of a flawed individual, somebody who had remarkable talent and intellectual powers, but who was just kind of he had a lot of issues, unfortunately. But this is, I don't know if you could call this a great biography by any means, but it was okay. The next is Solitude, A Return to the Self by Anthony Storr. And this is okay. This is kind of about kind of the benefits of being alone, and how being alone is kind of overlooked as a benefit, a kind of a personal benefit. I'll admit I don't remember this very well. It's been quite a while since I read this one. Exploring the creative mind, Storr looks closely at whether the artist and thinker's choice of isolation from society is a sign of health or neurosis. So I may have to reread this one of these days, because, like I said, I don't remember it particularly well. And to be honest, I don't remember it making very much of an impact on me when I did read it. The next is The Hour of Our Death by Phillippe Aries. I hope I said that right. My French pronunciation is just terrible. And this is kind of a study of the over the past 1,000 years or so, how death ceremonies have changed, how death is looked at over time in a different way, how it went from being kind of an impersonal thing to a personal thing. I know that probably doesn't make sense, but 1,000 years ago, people looked at death quite a lot differently than we do now. And this is not light reading, but it's not. I mean, you kind of have to be interested in the subject. And I'll admit this wasn't exactly what I thought it was when I went into it. So, let's see. And it deals with religion and that kind of thing. And this is mostly from a European point of view. But it does go into, up until, what year was this? I believe this is from the 70s. No, 1981. And it is a translation from the French. So, next is Arndt Anderson's Breakfast. This is Breakfast, a History. And this is just kind of a short, interesting look at how breakfast has developed over the past 100 years or 200 years or so. How it came to be thought of as, eggs and bacon or cereal or whatever. And anyway, I enjoyed this one. So it's I guess what they call a micro history, and it's kind of interesting, how people went from, here in America at least. Well, for instance, President John Adams used to get up every morning and he would drink hard cider, and it's kind of an interesting idea how we went from drinking hard cider to drinking coffee in the morning, just that kind of thing. Okay, the next is On the Road with Charles Kuralt. And back in the 60s and 70s, Charles Kuralt, he worked for one of the big news corporations, CBS, and every summer he would take an RV across the country, and this is just kind of short, very short. What's this? Here's London Bridge in Lake Havasu City, Arizona. It's just these were just kind of transcripts of some of the little segments he did as he crossed the country, the people he met, the places he went. This is actually pretty good. It's, as you might imagine, it's just light reading. There's not really much depth to it, but it's, there were some very interesting people he talked to. And this is, if you see this, you might look through it, and it might be something you're interested in. The next is A Bridge Too Far by Cornelius Ryan, about the Operation Market Garden. It's Market Garden in 43. No, it wasn't either. It was after D-Day, so it would have to be in 44, right? And just, this is an account of both the soldiers involved and the strategy, the people there on the ground, the civilians, and of course there was that great movie made that had pretty much every great British actor at the time involved. Sean Connery and lots of people. Was Richard Burton in that? Richard Harris? It's been a while since I've seen that movie, but this is pretty good. I don't remember the specifics very well. For some reason, strategy just tends to go in and out, like the essays. But yeah. So Ryan is pretty good. Ryan, he wrote The Longest Day, for instance, which we'll get to later, and he wrote The Last Battle, about the Soviet push into Berlin in 1945. And Ryan, he wrote these books in the 50s, I believe. Let's see what, I know The Longest Day is from the 50s. This is, The Longest Day, 1959, The Last Battle, 1966, and this is from 1974. And he was able to talk with the people who were involved. So these are pretty good. See, the next is Resilience by Eric Greitens, who at this time who is a former Navy SEAL. This is kind of a series of letters he wrote to a friend who was having a hard time, trying to keep his spirits up and give him some hope or whatever. It's okay. It's pretty good for what it is. This is 1,000 Books to Read Before You Die by James Mustich. Mustich? I'm not sure. This is the book that introduced me to Rebecca West's Black Lamb and Gray Falcon. It's really good that way. It's just little short kind of summaries of these books and things that people have said about them. There's The Name of the Rose. What's this? The Autobiography of John Stuart Mill, Death of a Salesman. It's just 1,000 little summaries and kind of just 1,000 little entries about interesting books. And there are a whole lot of interesting books, and this being BookTube, this is the perfect book for BookTube people. So here is William Gibson's Distrust That Particular Flavor. This is a series of essays, and there's William Gibson. And yet again, I wish I could remember this better. As much as I love essays, they don't seem to stick, and I wish they did. I don't know why that is. Here is Knights of the Road, A Hobo History by Roger A. Bruns. And this is really interesting. You wouldn't think that there would be much to write about hobos, but there really was. There was a lot going on with the hobo around, from about 1900. Well, really from the advent of the train up until about the late 40s or so. People were still hopping trains after that, but it wasn't really the same after the Second World War. And they started schools and missions and that kind of thing, and this is just kind of there's some hobo poetry, and this is just kind of interesting. I have no idea how accessible this book is. My mom got me this, or she found it at least, and I bought it. So, but I wouldn't have found it without her. So, the next is Adrift by Stephen Callahan. That's Stephen Callahan. He was sailing a small boat. I can't remember exactly where he was headed. It was somewhere in I want to say it was by the Azores, in that kind of region of the Atlantic. And his boat sank, and he spent how many days? He spent 75 days in a little tiny rubber raft with barely any food, with barely any water. This is a really incredible story, actually, and this is a pretty good book. If you're into, there's a recreation of him trying to spear a fish there. If you're into the sea, this is really worth reading. I don't know if I could have survived 75 days in a little rubber raft the way he did. It must have been pretty awful. So that's Adrift. The next is Aikenfield by Ronald Blythe, which Aikenfield is not the actual name of the village. Aikenfield, Portrait of an English Village. Blythe went to a small English village, I'm not sure, in Suffolk, and he talked to the last remaining villagers. There were apple farmers, there were people who had been gardeners on an estate. He talked to younger people who really didn't have any prospects in this village, and they were just going to move away, move to London, move to these larger towns. And it's just kind of about the last little bit, the last little spark of the English village. And it's kind of, it's a good book, but it's kind of sad that way. And then here is Essays of 5 Decades by J.B. Priestley. And there's J.B. Priestley. And I actually do remember some of these. This was published in the 60s? I believe so. Let's see. Yes. It was published in 1949. I guess this is a reissue from later on. And there's one in particular that I remember pretty well, which is Priestley, and this is from the 1920s. Priestley, I was having a lot of trouble with my car at the time, having to take it to the mechanic, and anybody who has to deal with mechanics, no matter how good the mechanic may be, it's just kind of an irritation. And it was just really funny to me that back in, I think, 1924 or something like that, it may have been a little bit later, Priestley had a car. He was sick of having to pay for gas. He was sick of having to pay for mechanics. His car was always breaking down, so he got rid of it. And he said that it was just an incredibly light feeling of not having a car anymore. And I just really sympathized with that at the time, which unfortunately I live somewhere where you pretty much have to have a car. But I just thought that was funny. It's funny how, even after 100 years, we're still having the same kinds of problems. And there's just that little connection there. But he also talks about Shakespeare and that kind of thing. He wrote a book called, I believe it's called Literature and Western Man. Don't quote me on that. I have it upstairs. I haven't read it yet. And Priestley also wrote, he was a playwright, I believe, and he wrote mystery novels too, and just novels in general. This was just fun. I really enjoyed this one. So, all right, that's part 3 of our bookshelf tour, and now we're done with this upper section, and we're going to move on. I think I'm going to go straight down the fiction shelf after this, and then I'll move over here. There's a little bit more fiction, and then over here this is nonfiction. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.